Morning. This past week, in my modified European history class, I sent out an assignment. Actually, we've been doing this assignment now for a couple of weeks in class, and in that class, what I've been doing is I've had two pieces of artwork, and one of them is medieval artwork, and the other one is definitely Renaissance artwork, because we're talking about the Renaissance. And one of the things that I wanted to do with that is to have the students compare and contrast those two pieces of art. And I didn't give them any explanation as to how to do it. And as you can imagine, the first results that I got were kind of sketchy. And so I sent it back. And I did this on purpose because I wanted people to wrestle with it and I wanted people to think about it. And this is a learning support class, and oftentimes the students in my class have had the opportunity to have things spoon-fed to them the whole time. So I'm trying to get them to think and to do this. And so I've sent it back now to some of them 2 or 3 times, and there's this one kid that I've sent it back to now 6 times. And I don't know if he'll quite get it. He's got some learning disabilities. He's on the spectrum, and so he's having some situations where he's not quite figuring out what things are. But he said, "Mr. Harrell, can you please not send it back to me again?" And I think that wrestling is something that is kind of hard for us to do. And when we're talking about holiness, I feel like we are wrestling with it. And I feel like in a certain sense, we're coming at this whole concept through the back door. We're trying to figure out this holiness of God and trying to figure out exactly what this means and how we wrestle with it. But I think that it is difficult. We sing the song, "You are beautiful beyond description, too marvelous for words, too wonderful for comprehension, like nothing ever seen or heard. Who can grasp your infinite wisdom? Who can fathom the depths of your love? You are beautiful beyond description, majesty enthroned above." We see this, and this idea of being beautiful beyond description is really true in a certain sense when we're talking about God. One person said, once you have put down all the things that help you understand God, then you have just opened up the door for a whole bunch of other things that you're going to have to explain. And so when we're talking about the holiness of God, there is this sense that it's very hard to get a grasp of. But I do believe that while it is true that He is beautiful beyond description, while there is nothing that fully describes who God is, I think we have a responsibility to try to wrestle with it and to try to put words onto it. I understand that the Spirit intercedes for us with groans too deep for words in certain situations, and I understand that as we grapple with this idea of who God is in His holiness, this is partly what we are doing. I believe that when we come to God's holiness, we are at a distinct disadvantage. We can love. We talk about the love of God. But I think in a certain sense we sort of semi-understand that, maybe not completely the depth of it, but because we love, we understand something about God's love. We understand something about how that works. However imperfectly we may do it, we understand that what we are doing is a reflection of God's love, and so we can kind of grasp that, so we can kind of understand it. We can try to do the right thing when we're talking about justice and we're talking about righteousness, and we spent several weeks doing that. And we can understand what is right and what is wrong. And as I take a look at the situation in Philadelphia this past week, my heart breaks. Because I look at this and I think about all the things that are right and wrong and all the misunderstanding and all of that, and it hurts. But we understand justice. We understand that there is a rightness. We understand that we try to do the right thing. And so as we do that and we understand God's perfect justice and His perfect righteousness, we understand it in view of a concept that we work through as something that we can do. But when we speak about holiness, we are speaking about something else entirely. And that really becomes the beginning of our understanding. Last week I spoke about the dreadfulness of God, about the awesome nature of Himself. But in a real sense, when we come to grips with that, we see our problem most clearly as we grapple with this. Again, in everything else, we come to God with a sense of understanding because we see glimpses of certain aspects of God within us. For with his holiness we have no such glimpse. We stand on the outside trying to look in. And it is so different as to be scary. He is so different in this that it is frightening. And when God calls us to holiness, it is scarier still because we have to look at it. We have to see it. We have to get close to it. We have to focus on it. And when we do, we, along with all of Israel, as we saw back in Exodus chapter 20 last week, we tremble at it. We wish for someone else to speak to God on our behalf. We wish for someone else to take a look at God and to approach God on our behalf, just as Israel wanted Moses to do that for them. We are on the outside, and because there is no part of us that is holy, we have no frame of reference with which to understand this part of God. And so we have to understand him from the point of difference. We have to understand him from the point of separateness. And this becomes our frame of reference. This is how we are to compare him with everything else. In Exodus chapter 15, verse 11, this is a song of Moses. And Moses says, "Who among the gods is like you, O Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonders?" And the answer to that question is no one. No one is like you in any way, in any sense. So last week we spoke about dread. This week I'd like to talk about fascination. And as we talk about fascination, I want us to understand something about this, because I started this series a couple weeks ago about some disturbing trends. Some disturbing trends that I see among my brothers and sisters. Disturbing trends that I see in the church, where people are stepping away from doing holy things. People are stepping away from doing things that are right. And so we pepper our language with things that we wouldn't have done maybe 5-10 years ago. We engage in activities that we would not have engaged in. Our young people are exposed to things that are much more dangerous than we can even imagine. Things that when I was their age, I was not exposed to. And they're going down and they're being led in certain ways. And I believe that part of what we do, if we stand fascinated, if we look intently at who God is in his holiness, it is a safeguard for us to keep ourselves from going down paths that we should not go down, to make us into holy people. Exodus chapter 19. We're going to spend time there. I know I've got some other things up there, but I want us to look at Exodus chapter 19. We are on the mountain. God has led Israel out of Egypt and brought them to Sinai. He is coming in dark clouds, shaking the ground with lightning, thunder, and trumpets. The people are trembling themselves, and yet God tells Moses to warn them not to force their way past the limits to come up to the Lord. Is anybody struck by that? As if I'm going to approach a flaming mountain. As if I am going to approach a dark, thunderous cloud on a mountaintop when the entire ground is quaking. As if that is something that I was going to do. And yet there it is. There's a fascination in all of that. I think we can kind of sense that sometimes when we see something that is fascinating, and we know that it's dangerous, and we know that it's not necessarily safe. We have a tendency to go to that cliff, and we have a tendency to take a look down. We have a tendency to do those types of things. I think that this is what God is talking about here. I know that I am fascinating. I know that in my holiness this is what I am. I know this, and you are going to have the tendency, the desire to get close. To get closer than is safe. To get closer than what is good for you at this particular point in time. We see that Moses was compelled in certain ways to be attracted to that which is holy. And maybe it's something that we don't necessarily look at as being that way. But in Exodus chapter 3, we have Moses who was tending this flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Horeb, by the way, is Sinai. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. I would contend that what is going on right there is that Moses is fascinated with something that God is doing. And God is going to explain where that fascination comes from. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. And God says, Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. He's fascinated. He's wondering. He's looking. He's curious. When we go to the Psalms, we see all sorts of questions. We see all sorts of questions of David as he is struggling with God and he is looking on God. And this is something that I see that is a pressing question of desire. In Psalm 15:1, he says, Lord, who may dwell in your sanctuary? Who may live on your holy hill? Who can do that? It is an amazing, awesome place, a fear-inspiring place, and yet that is where I most long to be. That's where I want to go. And he answers the question, he whose walk is blameless, and who does what is righteous, who speaks truth from the heart, no slander. And all of this, we are seeing holiness manifested here. In 24:3, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For he founded it upon the seas and established it upon the waters. Who may ascend to the hill of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not lift up his soul to an idol or swear by what is false. And as David is approaching that reality, as he is approaching that mountain, he's realizing that it is holiness that is attracted to him. It is holiness that is drawing him there. Psalm 43. Our pages are stuck together. Vindicate me, O God, and plead my cause against an ungodly nation. Rescue me from deceitful and wicked men. You are God, my stronghold. Why have you rejected me? Why must I go about in mourning, oppressed by the enemy? Send forth your light and your truth. Let them guide me. Let them bring me to your holy mountain, to the place where you dwell. I cannot help but see when David is using this particular language, he has in his mind the mountain of God. And we may have a reference to Sinai there. We may have a reference to Zion there. I'm not exactly sure which one he's talking about, but the allusion is definitely Exodus. Send forth your light and your truth. Let them guide me. What led the people of Israel out of Egypt? What led them all that time in the desert but a fiery, cloudy pillar? I love that song, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. David is wanting to dwell on God's mountain and be rescued. Allusion to fire and cloudy pillar and the holiness of God. This is the attraction. But I think also this attraction is there despite our fears. And we talked about the dread of God. We talked about how different he is in so many different ways. But as we take a look at the various passages here that I've got up here on the screen, we see this fascination and we see this fear in all of this. And in Moses, in Exodus 33:18 and following, it says, Moses says, now show me your glory. And the Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live. I want you to keep that in mind. I think we know that. We have seen that several different times. We've seen it in the Old Testament. We're going to see it in these other passages. No one can see my face and live because I am holy. And I know, Moses, that this is exactly what you want to do. I know that this is what your desire is. Then the Lord said, there is a place near me where you may stand on a rock where my glory passes by. I will put you in the cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. And again, I'm thinking of these great hymns that we sing. All of this, he hideth my soul in the cleft of the rock. We hear these things. It's an allusion to this. And we understand that Moses, although he is quaking with fear in other passages, he desires it. It is what he wants. Isaiah 6 is one of those passages that we are all familiar with. It is Isaiah's call. And as he is called, he sees God. He sees the seraphs. He sees the angels flying back and forth. He sees all of that, and he says in verse 5, woe to me, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Ezekiel 1. We have Ezekiel's call. And as Ezekiel is called, he falls on his face in worship and in reverence. This is in the last verse of chapter 1. As we take a look at all of what is going on in chapter 1, I'm sorry, I was going to explain some of that. We have the wheel inside the wheel. We have eyes covering the wheel. We see the presence of God in all of this way. We see the actual image of God, and we see all of that. And Ezekiel, he is fascinated by it. He can't turn away. He's looking at it. But then when he sees that the appearance of the likeness that he saw, finally when he saw that part, when he saw the likeness of the glory of the Lord, he fell face down and heard the voice of one speaking. We see it in Daniel 10. We're not going to go there, but we see it in Daniel 10. But we also see it in Mark chapter 9. And right here we see that Jesus is brought to a mountain. And at that mountain, he is transfigured. And he is shown in all of his glory for who he is. And in that moment, those that are with him are amazed. And we find that Peter says something. He says, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Do we understand what Peter is going through right here? He is taking a look at all this. He is one of the privileged few who sees Jesus just like he is in all of his glory. And he says, it is good for us to be here. I'm glad to be here. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And I can't stop talking. Let us set up 3 tents for you guys. For all 3 of you. What's it say? It says, he did not know what to say. That doesn't keep him from talking, does it? They were so frightened. They were so frightened. But they couldn't look away. They were fascinated. Absolutely, totally fascinated. And so here we are. Despite our fears, we want to come into the presence of God. We want to be in his presence. We desire it. And in a certain sense, we want that holiness for ourselves. And I know that we haven't quite defined what that holiness is, but we do know that that holiness is fascinating. We're going to come to definitions a little bit later. We're going to understand that. But I want us to understand this, because when we take a look at what is so amazing about God is, finally, he is not simply calling us to be holy, but he is also making it possible for us to be holy. He is doing it so that we can stand in his presence totally fascinated, with our mind and our eyes totally fixed on God, becoming more like him every moment. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 7 through 4 through 6, we have a recap of what was going on Mount Sinai, all of what was going on in Exodus chapter 19. And when we take a look at this, we find that there is in the Old Covenant a ministry that brought death, engraved in letters of stone, the 10 Commandments. It came with glory so that the Israelites could not look steadily on the face of Moses because of its glory. We see all that. But we find that there is a new glory in what the new covenant allows. We find that there is a new glory in Jesus Christ, a glory that does not fade and is much greater than the glory that was in the past. And in verse 12 it says this, therefore, verse 11, it's unfading. In verse 12, therefore, since we have such a hope, we are very bold. We are not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face to keep the Israelites from gazing at it while the radiance was fading away. But their minds were made dull, for to this day the same veil remains when the old covenant is read. It has not been removed, because only in Christ is it taken away. And so as we take a look at all of this, we find that as the Israelites approached the mountain and they talked to Moses and they said, Moses, we want you to go before us. We want you to talk to this awesome God that we are being called to serve. We want you to talk to the one who is holy. Moses, as he came down the mountain, his face shone. And even that was a little bit on the frightening side. But he showed his face to the Israelites to show that he had been in the presence of God. And they didn't want to see that. It was scary. And so they approached the law. They approached all of that from a distance. They approached everything that God was and is from a distance. But then, when anyone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away and we see completely. We also find that we, who with unveiled faces reflect the Lord's glory, we are being transformed into his likeness with ever-increasing glory. And so as we look upon the Lord, as we take a look at what the Lord is, as we focus on him, as we stand completely fascinated on him, we are transformed from within. And we become holy so that we can start to grasp what exactly this holiness is. So that we can understand how to live and be what we need to be. But it's not just a matter of us reflecting God's glory just for ourselves. Just as it was not for Moses to reflect God's glory just for himself. He was there for the people. We too are there. In chapter 4 it says, therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart. Rather, we have renounced secret and shameful ways. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of truth, word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves to every man's conscience in the sight of God. Do we see what is going on there? Do we understand what is going on there? What is going on is, as we are reflecting God's glory in our lives, as we are being transformed from glory to glory, as we are made more and more into his likeness, and as we preach the gospel, and as we make clear the reasons why we are living the way that we live, people are fascinated still by the holiness of God. And when they see us, they are fascinated. And they are commended to us. And we find, as this happens, and even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing. The God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers so that they cannot see the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. For we do not preach ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. Now let us make sure that we understand this part in verse 6 very, very clearly. For God, who said, let the light shine out of darkness, made his light shine in our hearts to give us the light, the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ. Change from glory into glory, where we can finally stand in his presence and see his face as holy. That, my friends, is fascination. When we keep on looking and looking and looking, and we become more and more like Christ, that's the goal. That's becoming holy. Maybe you have been fascinated for a while, But maybe as that fascination has turned to fear or whatever, you have allowed yourself to say, okay, I can't look anymore. I've got to turn away. I can't be in his presence. You're still going to be fascinated. And you're not going to be satisfied until you make the choice to be transformed by Jesus Christ. And so if that's a decision that you want to make today, we offer that opportunity. Whatever your needs, please make it known.
God sent his son.